I found out that Afghanistan in early spring isn't the garden spot of the world either. Instead of blowing snow, we got blowing dust, and I wasn't sure which was worse. Both have serious disadvantages. I think I'm tending toward a preference for snow, though. At least it melts and goes away dust, and sand just get into small crevices and clog up the works. 25% of our heavy equipment, bulldozers, dump trucks, rock crushers, etc. were down on any given day because dirt had fouled air intakes, gotten into lubricating oil, or any number of other things. It's particularly galling because most of our machinery was made for environments where dust and sand are part of the working environment. I was beginning to suspect a little sabotage. 2 weeks after my first suspicion, Marine Lance Corporal Arvin Cantwell and I caught one of the nameless, unskilled laborers screwing on an air filter housing that should never have been unscrewed to begin with. We didn't like hiring these guys because it was impossible to vet them, and we had no idea if the local warlord had actually sent them as trusted workers, or whether the guy just wandered into camp. The one we caught might have been Osama bin Laden's cousin, for all we knew. The handful of dirt and rocks we found in the air intake confirmed he had ties to one terrorist group or another, so we turned him over to a trio of Afghani National Guard soldiers. They took him away, and we never saw him again. The incident put us on guard, and our equipment uptime improved dramatically, but other things continued to crop up. We had about 40 days to go on our schedule, so we clamped a tight security on all our vehicles. First, we parked them separately from the main tent city, set up for locals and contractors alike. Then Lieutenant Fredericks put on a night guard around them, and my crew also provided personnel for that task. My people weren't armed, but they could sure raise a commotion if they saw anything out of the ordinary. Their purpose was to get an alarm spread wide enough and quickly enough for some of those tough Marines in our security platoon could handle whatever came up. There was a pervasive concern among all the imported contractor personnel that if something was going to happen, it was going to happen soon, because once the road was bulldozed all the way to the border, disrupting it would be a strictly local event and easily repaired. We were uneasy and uncomfortable. I'm going to have a talk with Melissa, I guess. Turns out she's been passing my emails on to my ex-wife, Sherry. When I'd last talked face-to-face with Karen, Sherry's name had come up as an obstacle in mine and Karen's relationship. Karen thought I wasn't over Sherry yet, and that she would always be some kind of ghostly presence between Karen and me. I thought that was ridiculous, but fortunately I bit my tongue before letting that word get out into the discussion. I don't know much about women, but I was smarter than that. Anyway, that Melissa was giving Sherry information about me. Melissa compounded the error by telling me that Sherry was concerned about me. It was all so darned irritating. In some way, although I had no control over it, it was a validation of Karen's concerns. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. It seemed to say that Sherry was still a part of my life, even though we've been divorced over 3 years now. I really didn't appreciate Melissa telling me Sherry wasn't dating anyone and would not date because of her guilt from the way she treated me so long ago. Big deal. Unbidden, some of the good memories came back to me last night. Though, like that first afternoon I went into the little cafe on the main drag just off campus. I was plowing my way toward a mechanical engineering degree, attending class in the daytime and working at night to make ends meet. Sherry was a waitress in the cafe and gave me the biggest smile when I sat down at a table at her station. I think I fell in love before she handed me a menu. There were other dreams, but that was the most striking. It was in the mindset of being highly security conscious that I found myself watching a chubby young Afghani male in the midday chow line a week later. He caught my attention primarily because he appeared suddenly from between two of our big dirt haulers. I hadn't seen anyone in that vicinity as I'd walked by, so his emergence startled me. The more I watched him, the less I liked what I saw. He'd come out of nowhere as if he'd been hiding out there beyond the heavy equipment, and he was looking all around like a country boy just come to the big city. I set my cup down on the hood of one of the Marine Hummers and repositioned the M4 on the strap that hung on my right shoulder. I put the muzzle pointing down and grabbed the pistol grip. That meant I had to twist the carry strap a little, but now I had the weapon ready for action. Seconds count, and I just saved myself a couple if something was about to go down. Lance Corporal Myers was with me at the front fender of the Humvee. His steel tray and coffee cup sat beside mine. There were only a few of us who would sit down while eating. We wanted to be able to see all around and react quicker to potential threats. So we stood, and the Hummer's fender was a nice ledge at a convenient height for our purposes. Billy, the kid, of course. Myers was one of the squad leaders, and we'd become pretty good friends over the past couple of months. He and I were the best shots in the group's sporadic and highly unofficial target shooting contests. I examined and then loaded a 30-round magazine in the M4 every morning, just like the Marines did. I'd pulled the charging handle to lock the bolt back this morning as part of the loading operation, but now I thumbed the bolt catch release to send the bolt forward and chamber around. As I watched the unknown young man, I clicked the safety off. My right forefinger was along the receiver instead of on the trigger. I didn't want to fire accidentally. Only a fool puts a finger on the trigger of a deadly weapon if he isn't ready to pull it. Sir, Mr. Masters, what's wrong? Billy Myers had glanced down when he heard the bolt mechanism snap forward in my M4 and saw I was loaded for bear. I'm not sure, I murmured, watching the young guy across the way. The kid had a strange expression on his face, intent, mesmerized, and scared. Suddenly my suspicions were kicked into high gear. This Afghani was positively rotund, a very plump young male in a place where there just wasn't that much food to go around. The only fat males I ever saw in this region were older men with a comfortable amount of authority. Their very plumpness was a sign of their wealth and power. This young man didn't meet any of the criteria. Damn, I breathed softly. The young man was digging under his loose clothing, finally pulling a cord up the open V-necked overgarment he had on. There was nothing I could think of in the Afghani wardrobe that matched what he had in his hand. He was walking quickly toward a big group of Marines and my construction contractors who gathered around the massive soup kettles waiting for seconds. I opened my fingers and let my cup of coffee drop. No, I yelled. The man spun around and looked at me. A gust of wind pasted his clothing to his body, and I could see the outline of several big blocks of something wrapped around his upper body and waist like a vest. He turned and tried to run toward the group of men. Yanking the M4 up and putting the sights on the back of his head, I pulled the trigger. There were a lot of guys downrange, and normally I wouldn't have fired, but nothing about this was normal. I saw the spray of blood, bone, and brain. He pitched forward, dead before he knew it. I guessed, in a fleeting thought, that it was true a headshot killed a man instantaneously for all practical purposes. Whether it had or not, the detonator cord was not pulled, and the gang of construction workers over there were not blown into tiny bits. Boots and saddles. Boots and saddles. Corporal Myers was screaming the untraditional alert signal for the detached platoon of Marines into his radio. The young privates had heard the phrase in an old John Wayne movie that had made its way out to us, and they'd adopted it as quick warning cry. The lieutenant didn't like it, but he wisely put up with it. There were more shots. They came from behind me. Billy and I whirled around to see a ragged line of armed men running toward the encampment. More were scrambling from a ravine no one had paid any attention to before. The Lance Corporal and I both went to one knee and began firing. The M4 fires single shots or 3-round bursts. I kept the selector on the semi-automatic setting and squeezed off round after round. There were more Marines getting into action now. I could hear the lieutenant directing a squad into position to pour an enfilading fire on the line of terrorist fighters. Seconds later, the squad opened fire, and the number of attacking terrorists began to decrease rapidly. I punched the catch release to drop the empty magazine and slapped another one into place, tapping it to make sure it was seated properly. Hearing a discordant noise, I looked to my left. An old Afghani wearing a black turban, his face twisted with hate, was running toward me as fast as he could go, screaming imprecations at the top of his lungs. More importantly, he was firing a semi-automatic pistol at Billy and me. Billy wasn't going to be able to do anything about the new attacker. He was still engaging the group of terrorists coming in from the ravine. It was up to me. I swiveled clumsily around. I'd been shooting to my front, and he was coming at me from my left and started shooting back. This time I moved the selector to automatic with my thumb and began firing 3-round bursts. The second group stitched 3.223 caliber holes, and he lost all interest in killing Billy and me. Still running forward, he simply leaned forward until he ran his face into the ground. It took a short time for him to bleed out through the gaping throat wound and the big exit wounds on his back, but he was effectively dead when he hit the ground. Most of that had to be relayed to me later, because as I was firing that burst, the last shot he fired hit me in the left shoulder. The heavy round caught me just as I was awkwardly getting to my feet and moving toward the shelter of the Humvee. I stepped into a depression and twisted my ankle before I could get there, though. Already falling, the impact of the .45 caliber slug accelerated my fall and my head slammed into the Humvee's heavy fender. I'm told I went out like a light.